Hi. So far, we have learned about the goods market equilibrium in Chapter 3, and we also learned about financial markets equilibrium in Chapter 4. And we looked at both of them in isolation. In this chapter, we're going to combine both of them because that's needed to really make sense of the real world situation. Yeah. If you were to remember one thing from this entire video, it would be that in the short run, remember the first uh, 5, 6 chapters is all about short run. So in the short run, output is determined by equilibrium in the goods and the financial market. So that's the key summary. You understand goods market equilibrium, financial market equilibrium, but output, how much the economy produces, is determined by both of them. And this is important because we see a lot in the news. We see about the incoming president wanting to cut taxes. So, how does that impact output? We see deficit for United States posing a significant risk to the global economy. So, when a United States executive branch decides to run a deficit where they spend more than the income, then how is that impacting the output? We hear that the current president wanted to do the exact opposite, hike in taxes, so take more money out from the consumers, and but do more spending. Yeah. So each of these things, or finally, like Federal Reserve cutting interest rates, but not cutting as much in 2025 and keeping the interest rates high. How do you make sense of all of this news? That's where we have to combine the knowledge of what we've learned so far to read each of these aspects: increasing taxes, reducing taxes, how that impacts the GDP or the growth of the country, increasing deficits, spending more, spending less by the government, how does that impact the taxes? So we will make sense of all of this news if we understand some of the concepts that we've learned together and combine it with what we're going to learn in this chapter. Yeah. So let's start to do a quick recap. So we did the equilibrium in the goods market. That is what is going to help us with this new curve called the IS curve. IS curve is the investment savings curve. Yeah. So do you remember we had this demand curve that we went over? Yeah, which is the demand of goods and services in a given economy. Yeah. It's doesn't have a 45-degree angle like what is produced. It does have a 45-degree angle because that's what's going to be that's what you produce, and that's exactly equal to the income. So 1:1. Yeah. So you went to over autonomous spending and all of that. But here, if you remember, what we did is we made some assumptions. The first one was we assumed that investments was exogenous and government spending was exogenous. So now let's, as we build new models that are better and better, we want to remove those artificial restrictions. So that was the first restriction we're going to remove. That is, we're not going to consider investments as given and fixed that doesn't get impacted. Yeah. So investments actually um, changes with output. What is investment? Investment is um, residential, non-residential, like company, equipment. So it has a positive impact. When there is an increase in output, investments go up. Similarly, it has a negative uh, connection with interest rate. When interest rates go up, investments go down because you're getting better return by those interest rates at a higher rate, then you would have lesser and lesser ideas to invest and make better interest payments. So the second assumption we did is we also assume consumption to be linear, but that's actually not. It's a function of what income people make and the taxes. So if we substitute I as a function of y and I and consumption as a function of y and t, we get a better connection between output, consumption, investments and government spending. Yeah. So y is equal to c plus I plus g plus nx. Nx is exports minus imports. We're assuming again nx is zero, meaning this entire model still assumes it's a closed economy. So we do these uh, artificial constraints like closed economy. Initially, we assumed investments as given that will not change because we are slowly building our model. Slowly, we are trying to add complexity. Yeah. So now let us relax these two constraints that we have. And with that, what happens is our straight line demand curve and straight line demand actually becomes a curve. Yeah, it's it still has an autonomous spending part, but it's no longer a linear association. So that's the key difference between what we've learned in chapter 3 and what we're adding here, which is we are saying, hey, investments change with output and interest rate. Yeah, and that has an impact on total production, and y or same as in this case demand. Yeah, so z it would be the same as we've covered in the past. Yeah. So the difference here is that demand would be now a curved, would be a curve and not a straight line. Yeah. So that is the key learning. And if you remember, we did that using this excess demand causes expansion or production goes up. Because production goes up, to meet that excess demand, more and more people and factories are needed, so they make more money. There's an increase in income and increase in consumption. Yeah, that again increases demand. So we went over this in chapter 3. So if you want to quickly recap why demand is a rising curve to the right, you would want to really recap a lot of what we did in chapter 3. But assuming you know this, yeah, demand goes up, we we can now start to build is curve relationship from here. Yeah, so as long as we understand that the demand is an upward sloping, um, we are now ready to learn about this equilibrium output. Yeah. So far with me. Yeah. So now let's find out what happens when to this equilibrium output. Yeah, this is where your demand intersects with this production line. What happens to it when there is an increase in interest rate? Yeah, what happens to this point, the equilibrium point of what is demanded when there is an increase in interest rate? Remember, we saw lots of news articles where they say, hey, Federal Reserve's not going to increase rates or more, but not going to cut more than twice in 2025. That was the article we started with. So what does that mean? Now imagine that the news is saying there's going to be an increase in interest rate. How would that impact demand, the ZZ line, production, and investment? You would want to understand when the Federal Reserve starts to increase the interest rate, how would it impact? So when there is an increase in interest rate, let's say that is step 1, so it's increase, what happens is the excess demand that exists drops. Yeah, because think about this, people are spending money because they are getting better value or better investments or better return because the interest rates are lower. So they are having better use of that money in better investments and making better returns. But when interest rates go up, that demand slowly fades away because that money is now going to be used and parked in this higher interest earning assets. So the demand tends to go down when interest rates go up. So consumers have demand, firms have demand, all of that will slowly go down. When that happens, um, production or output will go down. Yeah, because if there is less demand for goods and services, all of these firms who are producing goods, they will produce less because there's not enough people willing to buy that goods and service. So when production is going to go down, do you think they will invest in newer factories, hire more people? No, investments will go down. When production goes down because there's less demand, investments will also go down. Yeah. So when investments go down, production goes down. Do you think less when they're needing less and less people, they'll probably fire people. So overall net income on an aggregate basis will go down because there's not as much needed. There's not much to produce. Investments go down, income goes down. And when income goes down, those people on an aggregate basis who were consuming like crazy because they were optimistic about the economy, they cut down on their demand. Yeah. So the increase in consumption demand goes down, meaning the demand goes down. Yeah. So this will have a direct impact on overall demand going down. And so that will have another cycle again, and it'll keep having the multiplier effect. Remember, we went through that. So it'll keep going until a new equilibrium is hit. So super important to understand when there's an increase in interest rate, output falls. Yeah. So that is helpful for us to understand. If we understand this diagram and what we learned previously, what we can do is um, the demand shifts down. So how would we plot it? So this is our demand curve. Yeah. As we saw in the beginning of this video. What happens with all of the things that we just went over when um, interest rates go up, production drops. Yeah. And by that, what happens is that the demand curve shifts down. Yeah. If you see here, we start to see that the demand curve, which was originally this one, ZZ, is now shifting down. Yeah. Because the demand has gone down. And so when demand goes down, the equilibrium A is no longer the equilibrium point. The production now intersects with this new demand curve at A dash. Yeah. So what just happened is there was a shift down. The entire demand curve shifted down. Yeah. That led to output reducing from Y to Y dash. Yeah. And that is huge because the demand moved down. Yeah. Demand moved down, output moved down because the demand curve moved down. Yeah. And we went through that in detail here. So, and that was, if you remember, that was because of an increase in interest rate. Yeah. So what happens here is when the interest rate was I, the output was A here. Yeah. Output was A here. But when the increase interest rate happens from I to I dash, um, output went from A to A dash. Yeah. A to A dash, so output reduced. So if we get these 2 points, what tells us is output reduces when interest rate goes up. So that is the investment saving curve. Yeah. Investment and saving are two sides of the same coin. So in a sense, investments went down. Yeah. Output went down, investments went down. Yeah. So that was the key takeaway. Interest rates goes up, the demand curve shifts down, investments go down, output goes down, and as a result, investments go down. Yeah. So super important because if we can understand this, we can use to interpret the news better as to what is expected in output, what is expected in investments, what is expected in consumption demand, what would happen to the consumer sentiment. All of that is connected with interest rates going up. Yeah. So super important for us to understand how to interpret this. Yeah. Similarly, now let's connect the second part, which is the LM curve. So investment savings and liquidity money curve, LM curve. Yeah. So that is from the fourth chapter. So investment savings from the third chapter, LM from the fourth chapter. So we remember we covered how the central bank is what determines the interest rate, I. Yeah. So once they determine the interest rate, um, no matter what the output, the interest rate is the same. So we get a horizontal line, primarily because the central banks, the way they work is they don't start with how much would be the money supply. They start with what is the interest rate that they desire. Once they determine the interest rate, they pump in the money if they are in the expansionary mode, or they dry out the market with money if they are in contraction mode. So they start with interest rate, and then it's a flat line, primarily because no matter what the output, if they've decided what the interest rate is, the money supply would be would be changed accordingly. Yeah. So that is the LM curve, which is the central banks decide this output, no matter what output, the same interest rate will determine the money supply. Yeah. So if we remember that part, then what we can do is very quickly find out, okay, money, uh, again, we did this in chapter 4. So money supply, money that's needed, yeah, it depends on how many transactions you have, yeah, and what is in a function of interest rate, yeah. So if we remember that, we can then divide by price level on both sides, yeah. So M by P, dollar Y by P is same as real um, output, yeah, and as a function of interest rate. So interest rate is thus a horizontal line, does not change with any level of output. Yeah. But what this also tells us is that we are able to, convert nominal output to real output, and then real money supply on how much is needed based on, we're dividing by the price level. So in a sense, we are saying real money supply is equal to the real items of good that you need. Yeah. So real money supply is equal to the real money demand. And with that, we are able to build the LM curve. We built the IS curve, investment saving curve, and now we built the LM curve. So real money demand is equal to real income times interest rate. So yeah. Um, okay. So yeah. So this is the equation of how much money is needed in real terms. Yeah. Is equal to how much income you have in real terms times the interest rate. Yeah, so that's the same equation here. Yeah. So now if we understand this, now we can combine these two. Yeah, we can combine the IS curve and the LM curve, and we get the IS-LM model, because together where they intersect is what determines the output. That's the summary. This is the summary of this entire chapter, which is the together investment savings curves, or the goods market, and the liquidity money, or the financial market. Together they determine the output, or how much the country produces. Yeah. And so if we now plot the LM curve, which is the equilibrium in the financial markets, and the IS curve, the equilibrium in the goods market, why do we say this is the equilibrium in the goods market? Meaning any point on this blue line, any point on this blue line is an equilibrium point on the goods market alone. Yeah. So here, interest rate I, output will be Y, and that's the equilibrium point. Interest rate here, output would be here. But now if you're given a interest rate that the central bank is targeting, there's one point, which is this is the point of equilibrium output. Yeah. So if the central bank changes the interest rate, this point changes. Similarly, if equilibrium in the goods market change because the demand is shifting up or down, then this point will change. But now we are able to identify what will be the output of a given country. Yeah. And how it will shift when there are shifts in the financial markets, shifts in the goods market. And remember, goods market equilibrium shifts primarily because of fiscal policy. Government can spend more or spend less, increase taxes, reduce taxes, right? And the central banks can increase the interest rates or decrease the interest rates. So if we understand this, then we are able to have a model that tells us in the short run how will the output be impacted and how will the investments be impacted. Yeah. So here, this is the I equals I bar, which is, the central bank decides this. And the IS curve, as we just saw, is a function of consumption, investments, and government spending. Yeah. So now we're able to combine the ISLM model and be able to, tell this will help us to read the news and interpret it more better. So now let's take an example. um, for example, like when the central bank decides to decrease interest rate, we now know that this line can be moved down. Yeah. or when the government decides to increase taxes, what happens is the curve shifts down and so on. And there could be movement along the curve, or the curve shifting. Understanding what's happening, that's going to be the most fundamental part. And we are able to now make sense of the news better. So now let's take a detailed example. Let's say there is an increase in taxes. Yeah, Biden administration was saying they're going to increase taxes. Yeah. So what we see is that when there's an increase in taxes, the demand of disposable income reduces. If you're going to pay more money in taxes, you don't have as much money available to spend, which makes sense. So then the IS curve would shift to the left. Yeah, we saw this. Yeah, so we saw this part, but now similarly, increase in interest rate, we saw this entire loop. But increase in taxes reduces demand, same loop, reduces output, reduces investments, reduces income, reduces consumer demand, and so on. Yeah. So this is the new part: increase in interest rate or increase in taxes. And with that, what happens is the investment saving curve, like what happened in the interest rate, will shift to the left. But remember, the interest rates have not changed. So what happens is there is a movement along the curve for the financial market equilibrium from A to A dash. Yeah. And output has reduced, but there is a shift in the downward shift to the left in the IS curve. Yeah, so the demand has gone down, and output has gone down, and overall interest rate stays the same. Yeah, so this is what's expected. Output will go down, investments will go down when there is an increase in taxes. Um, yeah. So again, remember, there are some simplifications baked into this model as well, but with all of those simplification, this model tells us what do we expect to have happen when there is an increase in taxes, when the government's trying to, let's say, reduce its deficit, or it's in the fiscal contraction mode or fiscal consolidation mode. All of those terms mean the same setup. It's a factor that reduces the IS curve to the left. Yeah. Similarly, you can think of the opposite. If there is a tax cut, you will see demand go up, aggregate demand go up, and investment savings curve will go to the right. Yeah. So exactly opposite can be expected. Output would go up. Yeah. Similarly, there is a decrease in interest rates. So far we saw the fiscal action. This is the fiscal example of a fiscal action, which the government in power can decide what they want to do with taxes. Similarly, the monetary policy, the Federal Reserve the central bank can decide, hey, I'm going to decrease the interest rate. Yeah. Or I want to have a monetary expansion. What happens is we start to see that there is an increase in output. Yeah, because the curve has shifted down. Yeah, the interest rate was I, now it's I bar dash, which is a lower interest rate. And what that happens is when the curve has shifted down, we start to see that the goods market equilibrium, the curves remains the same. And so A becomes A dash, so output has increased. So for any of these external exogenous changes or external variables changing or external situation changing, you want to ask three things to really understand what the impact is. Step one, we want to check if the change, in this case decrease in interest rate or increase in taxes, what is it going to do to the IS curve, and what is it going to do to the LM curve? Ask yourself, pause, and make sure you understand. Is the curve shifting, or is it just movement on the curve? Yeah. Once you understand that, if it's a shift in the curve or movement on the curve, the second step is for you to find out, okay, what does that change that you've identified in step one, how does that impact the equilibrium? In this case, how is A moving? So A is going to move to A dash, and so that means Y is going to move to Y dash. Yeah. So having known what changes you expect on the equilibrium point or the output, describe that situation in simple words, saying, hey, output is expected to increase with monetary um, expansion. Yeah. So when there's monetary expansion, output is expected to increase. Similarly, opposite is true. When there's a monetary contraction or monetary tightening, output will reduce or go to the left. Yeah. So now we're able to go through both of these examples. We went through taxes going up or down, interest rates going up and down, right? The opposite of this situation, and understand what is the impact on output. Yeah. So this is the shift in the LM curve from LM to LM dash, and this is the movement on the IS curve from A to A dash. Yeah. So knowing this distinction is quite important. So now you don't have to do these one step at a time. You can combine both the fiscal action and the monetary policy action and mix them up and do both of them at times when they're needed. For example, let's say the government decides to reduce taxes and also uh, do the monetary policy. Federal Reserve also at the same time decides to reduce the interest rate. What happens at the same time? Well, it's going to be a big impact because the IS curve will shift up, and we'll also see the LM curve shift down. So A will go to A dash, which output will go massively up because of both of these tailwinds, interest rates being lower and also the investment savings curve. The output aggregate demand is up, output is up, investments is up. So we'll also shift to the right. Yeah. But if I were to tell you, hey, there's an increase in taxes, but a decrease in interest rate, yeah, that's possible too. So what happens is when there is an increase in taxes, aggregate demand goes down, output goes down, investments go down. So IS curve shifts to the left. Yeah. So A goes to A dash. But then interest rates went down. So from LM to LM dash. So then A goes to A dash. So output doesn't change in this situation. So that is important. So what happened? Output, the GDP, there was no recession in this case, even when there was a huge increase in taxes. So when tax policy, and fiscal and monetary policy act hand in hand, you can have a reduction in deficit at no impact on output. Yeah. So super important to understand how both of these work. And a question that comes is deficit reduction a good thing or a bad thing for investment? So well, it depends. Yeah. What does it depend on? As to what is the fiscal policy uh, action and what is the corresponding monetary policy action. If they are both in the same direction, you would see that investments would significantly go up. Yeah. And here there's been no change in investment. But if they have a differences wherein there's a contraction and there's no change in the monetary policy, you would see investments go down. And when investments go down, output go down. Output go down, eventually demand goes down, right? And so on, because the income went down. So super important to keep this lens in mind. Always deficit reduction uh, will not always lead to an decrease in output here, or a decrease in investment. Depends on what the other situation is that's happening at the same time. Yeah. But all things equal, if you reduce um, if you reduce if you increase taxes, you would see a reduction in output and reduction in investments. Yeah. All right. And primarily that is because investments is a factor of private savings and public savings. Yeah. So we might expect that when you increase taxes, tax revenue goes up, but at the same time, the public savings goes down significantly because of reduction in income. And so investments would actually potentially can also go down instead of it going up in some sense. Yeah. So super important to know what these variables are, how they're changing, how your consumers are, their sentiment is, their propensity to spend. Yeah. And all of that is super, super important to look through together. So applying this to the 2001 US recession, we saw, back in the 90s, huge boom in terms of optimism in the United States, where investments were growing almost at 10%. And the optimism was so high. But then they realized around this time period that, hey, the investments are way high. So the firms cut down on non-residential investments big time, and that led to this recession. At that time, George W. Bush and I think Ellen Greenspan was at the monetary policy. And so what George W. Bush did was he took fiscal action, and the Greenspan reduced the federal funds rate, which was around 6%, down to 2. So they cut taxes, but they also reduce interest rate. So that is going to stir up the economy in a big way. So that had a huge impact because both ways they reduced taxes, so revenue went down, and so that had a huge impact. And then spending went up because government spending went up as well as part of post the 9/11 crisis. Spending in defense also went up. Yeah. So we start to see that the US recession, both of these actions were in place. The fiscal policy action, but at the same time, also the monetary policy action. Yeah. And both of them really helped make this recession short lived. Otherwise, it could have become a much bigger issue. Um, Primarily, uh, but there are the verdict is still out not out as to whether they should have kept this interest rate this low up until the 2008 crisis. Yeah, they could have probably gone back up, but that is the key application of reducing taxes, reducing interest rates so that output goes up. Yeah, so we can apply this to the US 2001 recession. And finally, to end this chapter, and key learnings here is to remember that output, the equilibrium output, doesn't quickly move hey, interest rates went down, so A went to A dash. Doesn't happen that way. So in real life, there's a huge lag associated with policy action, be it monetary policy or fiscal policy. Monetary policy much faster compared to fiscal policy, but let's say there was a 1% increase in the federal funds rate, which is throughout, just assuming all of these four scenarios. Yeah, 1% increase in federal funds rate. Look how long it's taking for that increase in federal funds rate to impact sales. It took almost 5 quarters, yeah, around that time for a 1% decrease in um, sales, yeah, almost a year plus. And it took about 2 years to get to 0.7% decrease in output, meaning retail sales went down after a year, but output went down after 2 years, about 1%. And employment had an impact, but after 2 years as well. Yeah, it slowly started going down, but only at 2 years is when it had a full impact of 0.5%, not even a one-to-one mapping. Similarly, unemployment is related to employment. Yeah. But look at this part. This is the most important one. Even within a year, the price level had a no impact. So Federal Reserve increased interest rate by 1%. Do you think price level will go down immediately? No, the answer tells us that almost a year in the short run that had a no impact. Yeah, if you look at the 4 quarters, which is a year, there was zero impact. Starts to, price level starts to go down, meaning inflation would continue to go down after a year. So there's some amount of lag that is super important to understand as to people like consumers, you and I, when we see news or when we see some action or when we, let's say, lose a job, we will take a little bit of time to reduce our disposable income. We will we will take time to adapt. Similarly, firms will take time to adapt when they see a raise in federal funds rate. They'll not immediately with knee jerk change their investment decisions. Yeah, they'll slowly, have a quarterly meeting and then they'll reduce that. They'll also they'll take a little bit of time as to how much to digest this interest rate changes and have the right action. And even the production changes will take time. Whether they'll fire people will take time, whether they'll make new investments will take time, and how they will spend more money or not, those investments, it has a lag, almost a year plus. So that is the reality of knowing that this thing takes time. Yeah. So if you remember that one thing in the short run, Output determined by equilibrium in the goods market, the IS curve, and the financial market, the LM curve. And if you understand this, we will be golden to understand the news and at least know when to react, when not to react in the short run, because some of these things take time. Yeah. All right. I'll see you all in the next video.